The Nile flowed as it always had, patient, ancient, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. Its waters carried memory older than kings, older than pyramids, older even than the name Egypt itself. On its banks stood Alexandria, a city of marble and ambition, where knowledge was power and power was rarely honest. It was here, in 69 BCE, that Cleopatra was born. Not into peace, not into certainty, but into a dynasty already rotting from within. The Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt wore crowns of gold but trusted none. Not their ministers, not their generals, not even their own blood. Brothers married sisters. Fathers plotted against sons. Poison was as common as bread at royal tables. Cleopatra was not the eldest child. She was not expected to rule. At birth, she was simply another piece on a board already crowded with rivals. Yet from the beginning, there was something different about her. Not loud, not obvious, but deliberate. She listened. While other royal children were entertained by dancers and tutors repeating flattery, Cleopatra asked questions that unsettled the room. Why Rome controlled Egypt's grain routes. Why Greek was spoken in palace halls while Egyptian was forbidden. Why kings needed Roman approval to sit on their own thrones. Her tutors noticed it early. This was not a child who accepted stories. This was a child who dissected them. The palace of Alexandria was vast, but it was also a cage. Every hallway echoed with whispers. Every servant carried information like a hidden blade. Cleopatra learned quickly that silence was not safety. Ignorance was death. Her father, Ptolemy XII, ruled by Roman permission, not strength. He paid bribes to remain king. When riots broke out, he fled Egypt entirely, abandoning the throne without resistance. Cleopatra watched him leave, understanding something vital before most adults ever do. Power does not protect the weak. Rome eventually restored her father, but the lesson remained carved into her mind. Egypt was no longer sovereign. It was valuable property, grain, gold, position, and Rome was the landlord. As Cleopatra grew, she studied more than poetry and mathematics. She studied people. She learned how men leaned forward when they wanted something, how generals lied with confidence, how priests hid ambition behind holiness. Unlike her siblings, she learned the Egyptian language. This single decision separated her from every ruler before her. When she walked among the people, she spoke as one of them. Not perfectly, but sincerely. And sincerity, in a land long abused by foreign rulers, was revolutionary. By the time she reached her teens, Cleopatra was dangerous. Not because she commanded armies, but because she understood narratives. When her father died, the throne passed to Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Tradition demanded they rule together. Reality demanded they destroy each other. The boy was easily influenced. His advisors hated Cleopatra. They feared her intelligence, her independence, her refusal to be ornamental. They whispered that she was too ambitious, too visible, too much. Soon, Cleopatra found herself pushed aside, exiled, hunted, the daughter of kings reduced to survival. She fled Egypt with little more than loyal followers and knowledge sharper than any sword. From the desert, she watched her homeland descend into chaos under her brother's weak rule. She knew something they did not. Rome was coming, and Rome never came empty-handed. Cleopatra did not pray for rescue. She planned. She understood that to reclaim Egypt, she would not fight Rome. She would bind it to her. She would become indispensable. A Roman general named Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, chasing his rival Pompey. Cleopatra saw opportunity where others saw occupation. Smuggled into the palace, wrapped in cloth like contraband, she stood before Caesar not as a beggar, but as a ruler wronged. She spoke not as a girl, but as Egypt. And Caesar listened. That night did not change Egypt. Changed history, because Cleopatra was not merely seeking a throne. She was rewriting the rules of power. And this was only the beginning. The palace of Alexandria was never silent, but that night it breathed differently. Torches flickered along marble corridors as Roman footsteps echoed through halls built by Greek architects and ruled by Egyptian ghosts. Julius Caesar had arrived not as a conqueror yet, but as a judge, carrying Rome's authority like a blade hidden beneath silk. Cleopatra waited, not in fear, in calculation. She knew men like Caesar, not personally but structurally. Men shaped by ambition rather than loyalty, by legacy rather than morality. She understood that power respected clarity, not desperation. So when she was unrolled from coarse linen and stood before him, she did not kneel. She met his eyes. Caesar saw many things that night: intelligence sharpened by exile, confidence without arrogance, a ruler who understood Rome not as myth, but as machinery. She spoke calmly, explaining her removal from power, the manipulation of her brother's advisors, the instability threatening Egypt's grain supply, Rome's lifeline. She did not ask Caesar to save her. She explained why it was in his interest to support her. By dawn, alliances had shifted. Caesar declared that Cleopatra and her brother must rule jointly again, under Roman arbitration. This announcement shattered the palace like glass. Ptolemaic advisors panicked. They had underestimated Cleopatra's mind and Rome's appetite. War erupted within Alexandria. Roman soldiers fortified positions inside the palace. Egyptian troops loyal to Ptolemy surrounded it. Fire spread through the city. The famous Library of Alexandria suffered damage during the chaos. Knowledge burned alongside ambition. Cleopatra remained inside, observing. This was her education in Roman warfare. She watched how Caesar moved pieces rather than armies, how he starved enemies of momentum rather than attacking head-on. She learned how fear was cultivated deliberately, how hesitation was punished instantly. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile during an attempted retreat. The throne was hers again, but the cost was clear. Egypt now ruled itself through Roman permission. Cleopatra became queen officially, though she was required to marry another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. A formality, a tradition stripped of meaning. Her real power lay elsewhere. She and Caesar became lovers, not from romance alone, but from mutual necessity. A son was born, Caesarion. Cleopatra named him carefully. His existence was both protection and provocation. When Cleopatra traveled to Rome, she arrived not as a subject queen, but as a symbol. Romans whispered. Senators watched carefully. A foreign woman in silk walking among men who ruled the world with iron. She studied Rome as she had studied Egypt. She saw its strengths. She saw its fractures. And she understood that Caesar's enemies were many and patient. When Caesar was assassinated, stabbed beneath statues of men he had surpassed, Cleopatra did not scream. She did not plead. She did not demand justice. She left, back to Egypt, back to survival. Ptolemy XIV died soon after, quietly, conveniently. Cleopatra ruled alone now, with Caesarion at her side. But Rome was changing. Power fractured between men less visionary than Caesar, but far more ruthless. Mark Antony would rise next, and with him, the most dangerous chapter of Cleopatra's life, because love, when mixed with empire, never ends quietly. And Egypt once again stood at the edge of becoming either eternal or erase. The Mediterranean did not care for politics. It carried ships the same way it carried secrets, quietly, relentlessly. When Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, he believed he was calling a queen to account for Egypt's loyalty to Rome. In truth, he was stepping into a moment already prepared long before his messenger reached Alexandria. Cleopatra did not rush. She understood timing better than most generals understood war. Her ship sailed slowly, deliberately, its purple sails catching the sun like a moving omen. Silver oars dipped into the water in perfect rhythm. Incense drifted across the riverbanks before the ship itself came into view. Musicians played softly, not to entertain, but to unsettle. Antony watched from the shore. He had faced armies. He had stared down assassins. Yet something about the approach disturbed him. Not fear, but displacement. Rome was loud, direct, brutal. This was something else. This was control disguised as beauty. Cleopatra reclined beneath a golden canopy, dressed not as a queen begging favor, but as a living myth. Isis, mother of kings, gaze calm, unreadable. When she finally stepped ashore, she did not bow to Antony. She smiled. Antony laughed, not because he was amused, but because he recognized a challenge. Their first conversation was not about war or allegiance. It was about famine, trade routes, soldiers who had not been paid, provinces that bled Rome dry. Cleopatra spoke as an equal. Antony listened longer than he intended. That night stretched into many. Antony stayed in Tarsus far longer than Roman duty allowed. He drank, feasted, debated, and slowly forgot that he had summoned Cleopatra to judge her. Instead, he found himself defending Egypt's position to his own officers. When Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, Antony followed. Rome whispered, a Roman triumvir abandoning discipline for an Eastern queen. Senators mocked him. Octavian watched silently, memorizing every mistake Antony made. In Alexandria, Antony changed. He dressed differently, laughed more easily, thought less in lines and more in circles. Cleopatra never commanded him. She invited him to conversations, to rituals, to ideas larger than Rome itself. Together, they imagined an empire that did not crush the East, but ruled with it. But Rome does not forgive imagination. Antony was recalled. He left Egypt with promises, not plans. Cleopatra watched his ship disappear beyond the horizon, fully aware that love alone had never protected a ruler. Years passed. Rome fractured further. Antony married Octavian's sister to stabilize politics. Cleopatra did not protest. She prepared. When Antony returned east to fight Rome's wars, he returned to Egypt again, not as a lover, but as a man seeking refuge from a system that demanded obedience, not vision. Their reunion was quieter, more dangerous. Cleopatra bore him children. Antony acknowledged them. This alone was unforgivable in Roman eyes. He granted eastern territories to Cleopatra's children, an act Rome framed as betrayal. Octavian sharpened his narrative carefully. Antony was no longer Roman. He was bewitched. Egypt was no longer an ally. It was a threat. War became inevitable, not because of love, but because two worldviews could no longer coexist. Cleopatra knew how Rome ended its enemies. Slowly, publicly, permanently. So she prepared Egypt not for victory but for legacy. Ships were built, grain stored, treasuries hidden, temples reinforced. She ensured that if Egypt fell, it would not be erased quietly. Antony, however, still believed in battlefield honor. That would cost him everything. And the sea would decide the rest. The sea near Actium was calm on the morning it decided the fate of empires. Antony stood on the deck of his flagship, armor heavy on his shoulders, eyes fixed on the distant Roman fleet. Octavian's ships were smaller, faster, built for precision rather than pride. Agrippa commanded them, cold, disciplined, patient. This was not a battle of heroes. It was a calculation. Cleopatra watched from her own vessel, positioned behind Antony's main line. Her instincts screamed unease. She had advised against a naval battle. Antony's strength was land warfare. Legions obeyed him. Seas did not. But Antony had already committed. Trumpets sounded. Oars struck water. The battle began not with chaos, but with silence. Ships gliding, commanders waiting for errors. Agrippa struck first. Agrippa did not rush. He allowed Antony to exhaust himself first. Roman arrows cut through the air, igniting sails soaked in oil. Smoke rose, thick and blinding, turning the sea into a maze of fire and confusion. Antony's larger ships struggled to maneuver. Their size, once a symbol of power, became a liability. Oars snapped. Hulls collided. Men screamed not from wounds, but from drowning, armor pulling them under like anchors. Cleopatra watched the pattern unfold. This was not a battle. It was a trap closing. She understood naval warfare better than Antony did, not in tactics but in outcome. This was not a fight meant to be won. It was designed to humiliate, to isolate Antony politically, to turn defeat into evidence of unfitness. She made a decision that would echo through history. Her ships turned south. Not in panic, in precision. Antony saw the movement and froze. For a moment the battle vanished. Rome vanished. Only Cleopatra's sails remained in his vision, retreating toward open water. He did not think. He followed, leaving his fleet behind, leaving his men, leaving his war. Roman historians would later call this betrayal, cowardice, proof that Antony had been enslaved by a foreign queen. None of them stood on that deck. None of them felt the moment Antony realized that Rome had already decided his fate, and Egypt was the last place left that still called him human. The battle was lost the moment Antony left. Octavian did not pursue him immediately. He allowed the story to travel faster than ships. By the time Antony reached Alexandria, Rome had already rewritten the narrative. Antony was defeated. Cleopatra was blamed. In Alexandria, silence replaced music. The city did not riot. It waited. Cleopatra ordered temples sealed, treasuries hidden, messengers sent in all directions. She still believed something could be salvaged, not victory, but continuity. Antony sank. The man who once commanded legions now wandered palace halls like a ghost, replaying decisions he could not undo. Cleopatra did not console him with illusions. She spoke truth calmly, cruelly if necessary. Rome was coming. Octavian advanced methodically, accepting defections, offering pardons. Former allies abandoned Antony one by one. Even generals Cleopatra had trusted quietly shifted loyalty. She began preparing for death. Not suicide. Legacy. She tested poisons. Studied which killed cleanly, which disfigured. She built a mausoleum while still alive, not as surrender but as control. If Rome wanted her spectacle, she would deny it. Antony misinterpreted her preparations. When false news reached him that Cleopatra had already taken her life, something inside him finally collapsed. He fell on his sword, not cleanly, not decisively. The wound did not kill him immediately. Dying, bleeding, he asked to be taken to her. They lifted him to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had sealed herself. Unable to open the doors, she had him hauled up through a window by ropes. He died in her arms, not as a general, not as a ruler, but as a man who had mistaken love for refuge. Cleopatra did not scream. She closed his eyes. Rome entered Alexandria shortly after. Octavian stood before Cleopatra expecting fear, submission, tears. He found calculation. She dressed simply. No crown, no jewelry, only presence. She spoke of surrender, of peace, of her children. Octavian listened politely, already planning her fate. She understood his plan immediately. She would be paraded in Rome, displayed, reduced. That night, Cleopatra sent her children away. Then she acted. No one knows precisely how she died. Snake, poison, needle. The method matters less than the choice. She chose death on her terms rather than life as a trophy. When Octavian entered her chamber, it was already finished. Egypt fell. Rome absorbed it, but Cleopatra did not vanish. She became something Rome could never fully control, a story that refused obedience. A queen who ruled without armies. A woman who understood power not as domination, but as narrative. And centuries later, long after Rome itself turned to dust, her name still survived. Not because she won, but because she refused to disappear quietly.